Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Cosmic Corner on Faith Unaltered. Sorry so much for the delay. I am about an hour late. If you were waiting for this live stream and you came back for it, Lord bless you and keep you. I am, again, sorry for the delay. Got caught up at work with an emergency call and had to deal with a box truck with a lift gate that got stuck. So it's not really much I could do about that. Unfortunately, those kind of things just fall on me. And so give me some grace in that arena, but we're here and ready to start having a really great part 2 of our conversation about the Pixar movie Inside Out. As you can tell by the thumbnail and the image at the intro there, this is part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, should be linked in the description. If you go down below and click the link, you can see the first one. If you haven't seen either of these movies, spoiler alert, we will be talking about the movies. So if you haven't seen these movies and you would like to, and you don't want spoilers, as much as I would love you to stick around, please do yourself the favor and watch the movies first, so we don't ruin anything for you. So that fair warning, just getting that out of the way. That being said, I am super pleased that tonight is the Cosmic Triplets. I am happy. I am pleased already. Welcome, Troy and Saint Sean. This is going to be a really great conversation. We are missing our psychologist, counselor friend, Spencer. He wasn't able to make it for this one, which is a tragedy on all of our ends, but I am very pleased to do this anyway, and I'm very pleased to do it with you two gentlemen. How are you doing tonight, guys?
Well, doing pretty good. Been a busy week right before Christmas break. So, all of the last minute projects at work have to come due. So
right on.
I'm excited.
I'm glad you were able to make it, Troy. What about you, Sean? How are you doing today?
Yep. Your audio.
Oh.
Sorry.
There you go.
I might have to pop out. I'm getting the
Yeah, if you need to hop out and come back in, it sounds like you're cutting out real bad. Okay, while he's getting that, I would love to start out by saying this second movie I watched one more time just yesterday. It looks like Cosmic Septic. Just watched this 2 days ago. I watched it just after you. This movie is, when I revisited it, better than I remember, to be honest with you. And there's not a lot of movies that do that. It was really, really great. And I enjoyed very much revisiting it. And it was something that, like, I wanted to make sure that I had fresh in my memory the different, plot points and elements that we wanted to kind of go over. And I started to realize that there's probably more in this movie than we'll get to in one episode, but that's just fine because I am stubborn enough to go for the long haul. But Sean, you're back. How's your audio?
it sounds good to me.
Better. Okay, cool. Better. Welcome back, by the way. Fantastic beard. So just starting out, I have a couple of things written down. One of the things that I think I would love to make most focal point of, if possible, is really the opening sequences of this movie were really, really masterfully done. The first one that I think would be really great to dive into is actually just the opening of the movie itself, where Riley is reintroduced in the context of a hockey game. She's learned to be rather competitive. She's learned to work together alongside the team really efficiently, and evidently on the inside, she's learned her emotions have learned that each of them have a guided and purposed place within the full spectrum of emotion. And the first thing that you see is a really great scene of really well integrated emotions taking the console in turn to do their job. The first thing that happens in this movie is Riley accidentally does a foul in the game and gets called and put in the penalty box. She trips another player or something. I believe that's what it was. she ends up getting put in the penalty box, and Joy very happily says, "All right, everybody, move out of the way. It's Sadness's time to shine." And there it is. Riley appropriately being sad in the right moment for the right reasons, and that being a productive experience rather than Joy in the first movie being rather a tyrant and trying to avoid Sadness having any role because she sees negative emotions, unpleasant experienced emotions, as Spencer would probably put it, not bad emotions, unpleasant emotions. She thought they didn't have a place. Come to find out by the end of the first movie, you find out they have a great place. They have a wonderful purpose, and they all need their place. They all need their time to shine. They all have their space to function. That well integrated opening scene that shows her from the inside being let's say far less confused, really in a place of comfortability, really in a place of things are functioning exactly as I expect. She's not in a place of uncertainty at all, which is a great place to open this movie because of what comes afterward. While she's in that penalty box, there's a quick recap that Joy gives of what's been happening between the movies so that she can catch you up on it. Before we get there, did you guys have anything that you wanted to explore as far as the really well integrated emotions that she experiences at the beginning? Because I thought that was a really great opening.
Yeah, I think it really does sum up the first movie, the progress of Joy recognizing and integrating the other emotions, or Riley integrating all of the emotions. I thought that was really cool that Joy is playing like the cheerleader for each emotion. Like she steps back and lets whoever is necessary to control the board at the moment. But you also see Riley. I think there is more an independence between the emotions as unique internal family side, and Riley making willful choices that the rest of the emotions line up behind. So it almost gets the orientation properly that Riley is the full being, where these emotions are pixelated but integrated.
I like that. Yeah, they've come into being. They're participating in a body, to use religious language. The emotions are properly participating. What do you think, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, it really shows that the purpose of the emotion is to regulate the body, to preserve a type of like homeostasis within the body, and so the emotions themselves are ways that we can employ to address certain stimuli. And so Joy realizes that joy is not the appropriate emotion in every instance.
Yeah, and I think that's, to be honest with you, that's one of those things where I really like the way that they take the allegory to that level where Joy almost has her own personality type, so to speak, where
Mm-hmm.
Joy is not merely an emotion. She also represents like an unfettered optimism, right? Almost like a naivety. But like by the second movie, she's gotten over some level of her naive approach to wanting to be the only operative emotion, and the other ones being tangential or background. She kind of is learning to give place in the right way, but hasn't yet learned that, you know, she seems to be unaware of her blind spot for potential failures.
Yeah. I one of the things that I think she's the whole, and the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And I think that is really clear in this opening. And I think that what you're talking about is that naivety is, she's going from child to woman. It's a coming of age story as well.
Right.
When you're looking at the whole story. So I think that's a perfect segue into this story, is seeing it from that perspective, is that as she's learning more and more emotions from the first movie, and now integrated all those emotions, of course there's going to be a new travel into the depths and come back out.
Right, exactly. Another underworld motif.
To me, it's also interesting that all of the other emotions are very conscious of their role and their
Hmm.
appropriateness.
Mhm.
And joy seems to be trying to find place for her. And I think that also kind of speaks to our desire to be chasing joy and to fill any gap of emotion with that joy, or at least something positive that um, in any neutral space it would be seeking after joy, or joy is the one who's seeking place at that area.
I think that's a good callback too, because in the last conversation we had mentioned, I think it was you that had mentioned the idea that the church seems to be dismissive in an apologetic sense of people who are genuinely going through a rough time of it. And if their problem can't be solved with 10,000 hallelujahs and I'll pray for you, brother, then somehow that just like there's a problem on their end rather than a need to step up, something like that. And it's almost as though in a very generic sense, a lot of the cultural milieu that's been built around the modern church is what we call the Sunday mask, right? Like the church face, where when I come together and we're like, "Hey, how you doing, brother? Oh, I'm doing just fine." When you just got fired 3 days ago, like, no, you're not fine. You're not. And there are people here who love and care about you, and they're missing out on the opportunity to serve in that capacity if you don't tell them. And then there are those who are trying to be honest and ask for help, and the people who don't know how to serve them because they haven't been properly discipled are coming away going, this makes me feel very awkward. My best recourse is to avoid you. And neither of those work. Neither of those work. You know? Yeah, come give me a side hug, sister. Exactly. You
Yeah.
walk in, you're like, oh yeah, just I'm just fine. It's okay. Like, yeah, everybody's got their troubles. Yeah. But sometimes you're in a worse state than you would be otherwise. And that's
Mhm.
when you need the kind of community that you're supposed to be finding in your church sending, right? You're supposed to be able to come in and find the embrace of the love of Christ in that place. You should be able to find, you know, you should be able to find the regard that you need in order to even be able to express the problem, even if no one can offer you an immediate solution other than I'm here with you. You're not alone. Like sometimes, man, you'd be surprised. Sometimes that is actually sufficient. People are very resilient, but they're not alone. They're not very resilient when they're isolated, and people often feel isolated because of that. They've tried, let's say in the past, to express where they're at, and somebody, instead of helping them, decided to use the, hey, did you hear about so and so, let's pray for them, and then just gossip circle about that person. They feel betrayed by that. If you have not encountered this before, God bless you, but there are people that have encountered this enough times that they won't even speak out anymore. They have to be sought out when they disappear. And that's a really dangerous place for people to be. They don't even feel like they can ask for that help. They don't even feel like they can reach out to people. And that's a church body that is not well integrated. Speaking of integration, that is a church body where people don't know how to give and take place, right?
Yep.
That's a place where people feel as though when they show up with their actual face that they're going to be unwelcomed, rather than if they show up with their church face and they'll be readily accepted.
Yeah.
Church acceptance shouldn't be centered around your expression. It should be centered around your presence. You're here.
I I think that all of that I agree with. I think that we've lost the ability to be empathetic in that way, that sometimes we just need to sit there with them in their penalty box, or like when they're going through a fight, being able to have that give and take. But oftentimes just sitting, that awkward just sitting with someone who is going through a micro death and resurrection. Well, they're going through the death, the torturous part, going to, I have to give this part of me up so that I can get a more glorious life on the other side. That is a struggle, and it's every day, and it's every circumstance. And you're right. I think we so often have gone, well, we already have the solution in Jesus. We shouldn't be struggling. And it's like, no, he joined us in our struggle, right? And gave us an avenue through the struggle. He didn't save us from the struggle. And I think that if churches got a better understanding of the church as a hospital, people would be much more or less awkward when running into somebody who's sick for the moment.
I think that it speaks to when someone feels like they can't share, or that if they did share, it wouldn't be welcomed.
Right.
I think that it speaks to the I wouldn't even say perceived, recognized inauthenticity. You know, so especially in Western society, um, hundreds of years ago, people would throw falsely so-called parties that were really a show, right? And so everyone had to be on the best behavior. Everyone puts on airs. Everyone is doing just fabulous. Nobody can have a problem. Don't cause a scene. And that's what we adopt in church. And
Social
so
club.
when you understand that what's happening here is a show, that everyone is coming here and we're just putting on this show. We're not getting together in community. This is all for the show, and the show must go on. If you have a problem, take it off to the side. Somebody will have the prayer group come and pray for you, because we don't have time for that. We have things to get to. There are things on the agenda that we have to do. This isn't about living in community. This is about the show must go on.
Production.
Right.
Mhm.
It's a production. And so even in churches where you know, they talk about authenticity, that only really happens down in the small group level, because at least in the Western church, I'm not sure how the Orthodox treat this, because I know the Eastern peoples are much more connected with their emotions, but in the Western church, it's you're there as a supporting role for the show. And so you know, don't cause a problem, don't cause a scene.
That's right. Be there for people when you can serve in that capacity. Your silence and presence is often better than your platitudes. Just saying. And on that note, R.I.P. Bing Bong. As far as the conclusion that we gathered from the first movie is ultimately that when Joy finally has the revelation of Sadness's place, it's only because she is incapable of consoling someone who doesn't experience joy.
Yeah.
Right. It's only when you get confronted with those things that you learn, like, oh, those other experiences have place and I need to give way for them. Right. And if you don't, then ultimately you're robbing not only yourself, but the other person, because sometimes you'll need to be served in that capacity. Sometimes you'll need to serve in that capacity. And in neither case will you be ready if you don't even acknowledge the fact. Right. And so that's one of those things is oftentimes our inability to empathize. Well, not inability to empathize, our unwillingness to empathize with people where they are is often the bigger sign of our lack of integration than the person that needs our empathy.
Amen to that. So here, I have a question then. Do you think that, not that we need to go back over the first movie, do you think sadness is the first complex emotion, where the other ones are more primal? Disgust, fear, anger, joy. And then sadness is the first complex emotion that steps in. Just a thought.
I'm not sure that sadness is a complex emotion, because it was actually shown to be there as the second emotion that emerged. Joy was there at the beginning, and then as soon as Riley began to cry because something was wrong, joy and sadness had to cohabitate from the very beginning. And I think that was actually Joy's frustration. I think that was the source of it, was that she was the first intrusion, is how Joy saw it. It wasn't the first addition to an embodied whole. She was an intrusion. And Joy thinks that in order for Riley to be Riley, she needs to be primarily joyful. It's not exactly wrong, but it's definitely wrong, you know?
Yeah.
Welcome. I'm glad that this happened. Amber joined us just now. Welcome.
Hello. This is totally unexpected. I'm supposed to just be highlighting comments. I wasn't expecting to be on the show.
Well, I'm glad that you're here anyway. And technically, this is your first Cosmic Corner, isn't it?
It is, yes. I have been on Cosmic Corner before.
Congratulations.
Heck yeah. Awesome.
Welcome.
That's great. Well, did I before we scoot on to the let's say the recap sequence of things that Joy catches us up on? Is there anything else that you wanted to add to what we were talking about just now, Amber, with integration and the church?
No, not yet.
Okay, fair enough. Cool. Okay, then moving along, the next thing that happens is while Riley's in that, the penalty box, and Joy is giving us the previously on Inside Out kind of scoop, right? The things that she points to that I find to be the most relevant to a conversation like this is, first of all, that Riley's personality islands are changing, and not like small changes, not shallow changes, substantial changes, huge changes, to the point where the thing that used to be the biggest thing in her life was family and Goofball Island, right?
Okay.
Who let a woman in the discussion? So the biggest things to her were family and Goofball Island. And in the second movie, by far the biggest thing in her life is now friendship. And what an appropriate, this is a great representation of exactly what happens during this transitionary time for a young person becoming an adult. Is the first thing that happens is the heroes are no longer just the giants, the adults, the people that are above you in that sense. Now you start to have what that across the board peer kind of emulation, where it's no longer, oh, my mom and dad are superheroes and the whole world revolves around them and their opinion of me, right? But also the fact that there's this shift where now you have the friend group emerging, and as the friend group emerges, you have also the new hero stage of these people around you to emulate. And that's ultimately what those islands represent. This is the thing that she is aiming her attention toward, because they're of the most value. These are the things of the most substance in her perception, in her understanding. Friendship guides everything now. And so the most important opinions that weigh on her are no longer mom and dad, as made evident a little bit later on when she's getting out of the car and has this exasperated conversation with her parents who are just trying to be like, hey, honey, you have everything? You sure you're ready? We love you and it's time to go, but we love you. We just want to make sure that you're set up. She's like, oh, so exhausted with her parents. Like, why are you in the way? You know what I mean? And so that recap section is really remarkable, because the first thing that they notice, all of the emotions are like, what's that little thing down there? It's like, oh, that's Family Island, that little outgrowth at the bottom that nobody can barely see at all. That's what's left of family. That's not right? She need that. That's a lack of integration in itself. The family shouldn't be minimalized, but the opinion of the parents will and should be, in some sense, kind of overshadowed by the peer engagement and the new forms of emulation and mimicry that you get from a really tight-knit friend group. And so Riley is making, in some sense, one decision over another. It's not necessarily the guidance of her emotions at that point, because even they seem caught off guard by this. I thought that was a really interesting addition, is that the emotions are like, hey, what happened? So it wasn't necessarily that they did something to minimize family and maximize friendship, but that seems to be a natural byproduct of this kind of transitionary period of preteen adolescence to growing toward adulthood. Not an adult yet, because there's no real independence, but looking in some sense to establish independence, which is why I think it's kind of natural, though an unfortunate byproduct, to minimalize family and their input. And that's the personality islands shift. The main shift that I noticed in the personality islands was ultimately that there was a minimalization of family and a maximization of friend group. And now the friend group is what Goofball Island is kind of like subservient to, if that makes sense.
Okay. I think this is like you're starting to see the person of Riley being developed, right? Before, much more simplistic, much more naive, now she's becoming self-aware, but also that's in relationship with the friends around her. So, one of the things that I think we've discussed on here before, but the difference between an individual and a person. An individual is isolated from community, where a person is where they fit within all of the relationships that they have, right? So without the friendships, Riley is not Riley, because where does she fit in those friends, right?
Yeah.
And being able to read someone else's emotions and read someone else's cues, against the first one was all about Riley's cues and Riley's emotions. Now she's starting to be attentive. There's that scene in the car where she's focusing on all the little details in her friend's face, recognizing another person and being concerned about what is going on their inside.
Yeah. I also think that, in that moment when they kind of zoomed in on Family Island and it was just kind of the statuesque figures and it was kind of bare, I think that that's kind of telling that the islands almost represent shrines that are adorned with how important they are. And the ones that are more important have more going on because they're honored more often. Um, and I feel like, as a parent, I feel like part of the caring less about what your parents think and more about your friends, it has a lot to do with who you spend the most time with. So your parents' opinion of you is not going to be very, very profound in your eyes if you're only spending a few hours a day with them and they don't know all of the ins and outs of what's going on. They're like outsiders to your life, and yet they still have this control, so that it's almost tyrannic. And not to comment on Western society, but I just don't think that's the way that it's supposed to be. I don't think that we are supposed to ship off our kids and then just get them for a few hours a day during dinner time, where we try to investigate what's going on in their lives and be useful. Because you're just alienating yourself from your kids, and obviously you're not going to have that importance in their life, and they will learn through experience that the joy that they have at home doesn't really matter in day-to-day life, and so the importance continues to fall.
Right. I agree. I think that's really relevant to point out that the islands actually grow based on her investment in them. Right. They're not her investment is not a byproduct of the islands. The inverse is true. It's actually the islands developed based on her interaction and the level of involvement. I think that's really great. As far and the next thing that actually is a direct extension of that, the next thing that they introduce is that beyond Personality Island and the experience of emotions, something new is beginning to emerge, and two new things are beginning to emerge in Riley. Is the compilation of all of her prior memories and present experiences are forming these threads from the roots of her consciousness. These threads are forming, and those are called the beliefs. Right? Those beliefs are an extension of the development of that whole person that Troy was talking about. And as an extension of those belief systems, they introduced another second element, which was Riley's sense of self. This was one of the coolest. I thought that was one of the coolest things that they added in, was that they really established that she was not simply a machine to be worked by the dictates of her emotions. Now the emotions are a part of a working whole, where Riley actually within the first segment has an experience in that montage where there's a girl in her class. She's in school. There's a girl in her class trying to do a presentation. She's obviously very nervous. She's fumbling whatever on her words. Then she fumbles the jar of change that she has. It falls all over the floor, and everybody in the classroom is laughing at her expense, and Riley is not. Riley is not laughing. Riley immediately feels a deep empathy for this person. And despite the lack of consensus from the emotions on what to do about this, Riley steps up and acts of her own accord, irrespective of the dictates of her emotions, and says to herself, I can be a good friend. And then she gets up and goes and helps this girl. And because of that, She does something that we talked about before, which is that kind of catalyst moment where the first stone is thrown, right? But not in a negative sense. It wasn't a condemnation. It was a help. And once people see somebody doing something, it almost affords them the allowance to go and say, I'll do it too. And so there's a second friend that comes up, and she gains her first immediate friend group because of an act of kindness that draws them all into unity. She's got Gracie, and she's got Bree is the second friend's name. They all come together to help Gracie, and that forms their immediate bond because they all were like, this is what a good friend does. And so they immediately become invested in each other. After that moment, Riley has her first revelation about her sense of self. I'm a good person. That's where this kind of holistic picture first starts to take place. And no longer is she that nascent thing that once it's like shadows of personhood. It wants to be now she's actually that thing. She's actually that person. She has this independence, not only from her parents, right, but also from her emotions themselves. She's not stuck in this kind of closed loop circle of how her emotions are going to guide her at any given moment. Now she is this thing that rises above them. She has this place in and of herself to be aware of the fact that she is and has a self, and that self can do things, not just for her, but for others. That motif of self-sacrifice is almost immediately dropped into place. Really, really great. First 3-4 minutes of the film, you get all of this packed in really, really quickly. Freaking awesome.
I love that the emotions are trying to discuss what to do in that situation. And most of them are like, well, don't do that. Don't do that. And then Riley, I'm doing this. Like the emotions are actually silent at that moment. As she steps towards helping the friend, which I thought, like what you said, you're starting to see the distance between the parts and the sum, the whole, the person Riley. And I think that they did such a wonderful job doing that.
Yeah, they did a great job doing that. The only thing that I had trouble with was that I like that the thing represents her awareness of herself. And so if we could say that that is the awareness, that the awareness rises from the experiences and the beliefs, but the idea that like who you are is emergent from your beliefs and your experiences. I think that's probably too reductionistic, right? I think that we have like this orbiting sense of self that that is itself separated from just your experiences, that you're greater than just the sum of your parts.
And I agree with that. I mean, to be fair, they did call it a sense of self. They didn't like say this is Riley. They didn't say this is her identity. They said this is the picture that she's gathered that she can see of who or what. Maybe who. Not sure if it's a what or a who. Riley knows that Riley is Riley now. And this is the gathered impression that she has of what's happened so far. I think that's probably the best way to look at it. But I agree that we shouldn't like it. This is not to say that a person's identity should be reduced to their beliefs and their memories and experiences. Because as we pointed out earlier, it's also like identity is a social negotiation. This is a common thread in a lot of Cosmic Corner episodes, is that my identity doesn't belong merely to me. It is me, but I don't belong merely to me, and I don't exist for me or because of me. Therefore, my identity is not a private declaration that I get to enforce outwardly, right? It's something that it is a social negotiation. It's something that I give to you as much as you grant to me, right? God gave the animals to Adam and asked him to name them, but the animals themselves, didn't ask. They didn't show up and be like, hey, I'm Hippo. They took the name, but that's different than, let's say, Adam's relationship to Eve. He gave her a name, but beyond that, she was actually this thing that was of essential value to him. God calls her the helpmate, which a lot of that might sound demeaning if people don't know about the backdrop to that, but the word for that is actually not connoting that she's a lesser.
Right.
God is called a helpmeet in some places in the scripture. So it's not like this is something where, to be a help means that you're a servant of some kind, right? That's not what it's meant to connote. And so, Amber, I'm glad you're here. Do you have anything to add on that part specifically? Because this is something that I think is actually terribly relevant to a lot of the things that you're interested most of the time, is actually the development of something like that. Because I think that that's something that's drastically misunderstood. And this is something relevant to the story, because that's what Joy was trying to make sadness into. You're a servant of my goal. That is not the case, right?
Right. Yeah. That phrase there, Ezer Kenegdo, is everywhere else that it's used except in that first part of Genesis right there. Is always at the very minimum two equals coming to the aid of someone else who is an equal. Pretty much everywhere else, most of them are the greater coming to the assistance of the lesser. And so it is this idea that it's not even as much totally that. There is a lot of army imagery there. So it is the idea of two separates, almost like locking shields together in mutual defense or mutual support, so that when one struggles, there's still a unit there that is not broken. So to say that one is called a helper was a translation, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I went and looked at the translation history on this, but if I remember right, that was KJV and Wycliffe's way of trying to grapple with that phrase when they didn't have as much of the linguistic history that we have now. So there was some background and research work that they didn't have when they chose that way to. So there was some cultural role views of men and women that was put into the choice of helper there. So that was something that was laid onto it. But biblically, that is a picture of, at the bare minimum, two equals coming to mutual defense and support.
I like the image of the shields locking together. That's actually, I think, really helpful, because it doesn't connote that one is necessarily a rescuer and the other one some sort of like damsel in distress or victim, because neither of them have to connote superiority in that sense, right? It's really, like you said, a coming together and interlocking for common support. I think that's a really great way of looking at it. That actually ties into what we were talking about earlier about the church and being able to come forward and express yourself with freedom and vulnerability, and not have to live in a constant state of paranoia, in that sense that what you're going to say is going to oust you or get you, blacklisted or judged or gossiped about or whatever such thing. That's a huge drawback, I think, that a lot of people have experienced. And it's something that I mourn for when I see it, but it's not something that I personally have had much issue with, because I am a very open person. And though I experience shame when people look down at me or whatever, it's like, I don't particularly think I should be looked up to in most cases. So looking down on me is not exactly an insult in that case. And I think that's probably just a case of maybe I'm self-deprecating, or maybe I'm just aware. I'm not sure, but I sure as heck know that I'm not omniscient, and I know that I'm not God. I know that I don't fill all the gaps. That's for sure. So I think that, having an awareness of your need helps you to kind of mediate some of that expectation to be, always accepted as such. But there should be a draw in the church and in our intent, and especially being taught in the process of discipleship, that at some point, the shoulder that you need to lean on and cry on might turn around and ask for that same help. That should be built as part of the expectation. And if it's not, there's a terrible failure happening.
There's a phenomenon in the military called trench brothers that Beforehand, we all have our different backgrounds, different histories, desperate and all over the place. But once we get into the thick of whatever battle or stresses, and the military is high stress no matter which branch you're in, that you get this, I want this person beside me, because if I'm going down, they're going to do whatever they can to keep me from going down. And I feel the same about them. So I don't know if that's a better understanding for Ezer Kenegdo, but military ally. But I think it's deeper. I think it is this, kind of helper that opposes is one way of looking at it. But this, my life depends on them and their life depends on me.
Right. And a lot of the times when it's actually used is in connection with what you see translated a lot, depending on which version you use, as either Lord, as usually Lord of Hosts is what you see most often. NIV really botched it and just calls it Lord Almighty. But that phrase, when you see Lord of Hosts, that is, I can't remember I'm going to fail at the Hebrew. Remember, that one. That's I have a hard time remembering that word for some reason. But anyway, it's not just also referring to heavenly armies as well. So it is God of heavenly armies and earthly armies. So there's a lot of military imagery built into the word itself, and it's an idea of almost like when it's used in a military sense, it's like building a whole encampment around someone. So it's not just, there's the locking shields. That's kind of the Roman pullover into the New Testament kind of thinking of that. But in the Old Testament sense, it would be just like an entire army coming to surround and create a whole pocket to safety or of mutual defense. Like, so it's a whole like complete covering, not just like a single line. It creates a whole circle of defense around someone that you participate in, and you fall back and receive the defense of at the there's this interchangeability kind of idea there.
That's awesome. And it also shows that if there's anyone missing, it creates that gap. That's the vulnerability, is the missing piece. And so drawing attention to the lack of one piece. If the church was constantly in the state where they were in that interdependence and reliable, interlocking, that help that you were talking about, then those gaps would become a lot more apparent. We would be so much more concerned when somebody hasn't come to the fellowship in a minute to be like, hey, where's so-and-so? And then go and look to see if they're okay, to go out of your way to extend yourself to offer that help and say, hey, I notice your absence. It's not working out for us without you. We need you here.
That's a good sign of a poorly integrated church if they don't see that, right? So if we're looking at Riley as a microcosm of a larger body, right? And we're talking about the body of Christ and church as a subset of the whole body of Christ, each church being its own body. It's like my limb's not here. If any of us were fully integrated, a limb missing would be of some concern, right? And I think that you hit the nail on the head. If you don't have this integrated relational between all the components, the holistic view, right? When a component goes missing, and I'm not trying to degrade humanity to just a component, but realize it's an analogy and it'll break down. But if the component is missing, but you don't know all of the components, right? You're not in that relationship. You're not in that trench warfare together. You haven't shared mourning. You haven't sat with someone in that awkward silence just to be there for them. You haven't shown your struggles because we have to put on that mask for Sunday service, right? All of that shows is that you have a horribly or not integrated body. And that's dangerous, because when Satan or any type of trial or temptation that affects that body, there's going to be gaps, but you don't know what they are because you've never found the component that fits there. And I think that this whole picture of Riley and then taking it to the church is really cool, because you can see, oh, that means there's a part of the church that's not integrated.
So and is described as a roaring lion, right, seeking who he may devour. And one of when Amber said the circle of protection, one of the things that I was thinking is that when elephants encounter a lion, they put the little one in the middle and they form a circle all facing out. And so if any elephant decides it's not going to be part of the circle, then you lose the next generation. And so the idea is like we're all in this together and everyone's life is on the line. Also, by coming together like that and protecting everyone's side, you're protecting yourself, because if you're exposed, if your flank is exposed, well, then you could get eviscerated by a lion. So I like that idea. Speaking of the church, there's a flip side to that too, that I've seen, where it's not oh well, they don't notice that so and so hasn't been here. It's, have you seen so and so? I wonder what they're up to. And the idea is instantly, what sin are they involved in that they want to stay away from the church? Or can you believe they've missed 2 services in a row? And so then that's another sign of a poorly integrated church, when the first thing you assume is, instead of praying for this person and seeking them out and bringing them back into fellowship, it's you just want to basically act as Satan and accuse them.
Right. That was sort of what I was getting at when I was talking about the, let's pray for so-and-so as a means by which you can justify a gossip circle. Cause that's super pervasive in a way that honestly seems like it would be obvious that you wouldn't do that. But boy, does it ever pop up. It's insane.
Yeah. Well, it degrades them and starts pushing them out of the group. That's why I made the comment about be elephants and not zebras, where elephants will surround and create a one cohesive whole to protect the younger ones and the ones that are weak. If a zebra has any marking that differentiates itself from the rest of the group, they will kill that one. And that's more like what the church has been like, is that you have somebody that's going through something and everybody's got their masks on. And so the mask finally comes off of one person, and then they leave that person outside the group. And like you said, let's pray for them. But in that is gossip. And so you start degrading that human and marking them out. And so even if you don't actually treat them differently at church, you've actually degraded them to the point where you cannot relate to them in such a way that you put them in the center.
The idea behind that is that I think is that community and communion is a non-renewable resource, and that there's only so much to go around. And so we need to push these other outside of the group to ensure that I continue to get mine. Regardless, if there's one family left in this church, it'll be mine.
Right.
So it's like pushing everyone aside, that I'm going to be the one that gets the attention.
Yeah, that's scarcity mindset.
Yep.
What Spencer would call the lizard brain. Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the way that this ties into the rest of the movie, and I didn't want to stop here, but I definitely wanted to camp out on the opening sequence and the development of her as a holistic person. The way that first plays itself out is in the next moment she actually comes out of the penalty box. They win the game because she's integrated not only in herself, but with her friend group, that they, in like a nonverbal communication sort of way, pull off this really complex move on the ice and like get the win from it. Right. And it was specifically that all of them relied on each other in that help way. Yeah. Thread the needle. There you go. All of them relied on each other in that help meet sort of way to fill the gap, because one of them wouldn't have pulled that move off, but all 3 of them could definitely pull that move off. Right. And so it was really, really well structured. It was a really, really clever metaphor for not only an internal integration, a healthy integration, but also that communal integration, that they all had each other's back in that same way. Right. And so the thing that I think is most interesting is that that's how the movie starts, is with that really well integrated self and with that really well integrated friendship circle.
When I was watching that in that opening sequence, I thought, they did a beautiful job of showing that integration, but it also really stood out for what that means if you have early childhood trauma and how that disrupts your ability to learn how to integrate. And that disrupts your ability to integrate with others. You can't integrate with yourself. And even your ability to integrate into relationship with God, that you, if you're not, if you don't have that, you didn't develop that ability, how disrupted that makes pretty much everything else around you and your ability to be within yourself and community and relationship with God.
So going off of that, like you're the internal reflecting the external, it's like when everything was going well on the inside, then everything's going well on the outside, right? The emotions are getting along, everybody's integrated, and the team is working together as a whole. But once they realize the team is going to break up, then the internal, it's almost like it's not a one-way street of what affects what. It's more like symbiotic, like the external impacts the internal, and the internal therefore impacts the external. And of course, we know that from our own experience. But I thought that was interesting that they put that in a show. That it was like first it shows the inside, then the outside is also cohesive, and then once the outside is disrupted, there's chaos on the inside.
Right, which leads to the next portion of the story. Actually, is she gets news because of their win. She gets an offer from the high school coach, I believe it is, that when she's going to go to her high school, she's getting this opportunity. She was given an offer to go to a kind of hockey training camp for like a week or whatever. And so her and her friends, because they pulled off this really complex move and showed their capability of being a solid team unit, each of them individually was given an opportunity to further that, right? However, on the way to go to that camp, the first thing that she does when she goes home, her parents congratulate her. She's so excited. And then the first moment of, and I think this was the actual introduction of anxiety, the first crack of doubt seeps through. She remembers that penalty and goes, but what if I ruin the future? Right? Yeah, we all know that feeling. What if I ruin it? God, I'm such a failure. What if I ruin it? And her parents immediately so supportive. Honey, don't say that. You did fantastic. Look at the whole picture. Stop hyperfixating on the one mistake and look at the fact that the entire thing as a whole went exactly as you wanted it to. It was your own internal power to be able to come together with your friends in the team and establish this thing. You did it. You did it. Yeah, there were stepping stones of failure that taught you not to do that. Learn the lesson and integrate it. She didn't. What happens instead is Joy notices that she has this crack of doubt that emerges. And just like she tried to dispense with the less than pleasant experience of the other emotions, she starts to try to censor Riley's subconscious by disposing with bad memories. She puts this escape hatch that goes to the back of the mind and is like, you know what? We're just going to expel everything that doesn't comport with my agenda and start to build our own Riley. It's a Build-A-Bear workshop for Joy up there. She starts taking the memories that she enjoys or that she thinks will be productive to her end and takes all the ones that don't foot the bill and go, you know what? Bye. Unironically, those are the exact same emotions that they needed in order to create the fuller integration in the closure of the story. But in order to get there, what Joy does is dispense with the bad memories by creating this apparatus that removes what's in the HQ and shoves it as far away from the HQ as it can possibly go. And if it wasn't for Joy creating that mechanism, Riley's sense of self would never have been expelled. The emotions themselves would never have been exiled in that way had Joy not tried to censor the Riley that she was becoming to become the Riley that Joy intended her to become, right? And so Joy learned her lesson, but not really. What she did was start to displace the same strategy, this naivety that if you just build the right pieces, that Riley would just be exactly what we want her to be, right? And so the other emotions kind of swept up by this idea. Yeah, let's customize our own Riley. This is awesome. Let's do it. Not knowing that that would actually be the source of the problem. Riley has this crack in her consciousness where a doubt emerges about her ability to actually fill the gap and be the great hockey player, the great team member, whatever character that is supposed to be. She starts to then like subtract from herself and say, maybe I can't, maybe I'm not, maybe I couldn't. And eventually that culminates in anxiety's failure and brings about a belief in Riley. I am not enough. That was the thing that echoed throughout her entire consciousness. Everyone heard it and it broke them all. I am not enough. And that only emerged because her sense of self was disposed with, because Joy tried to make of it a custom Riley and dispose of what she thought was unnecessary suffering. Not realizing that the suffering and the anguish of having those bad memories was actually not a bug, but a feature.
Yeah. I think this goes along with what Christ says, if anyone wants to follow me, he must pick up his cross daily and follow me, is that Joy is refusing to allow Riley to go through many micro deaths and resurrections. And so pushing it off. And now it becomes a crisis of identity, right? Because now it is, you've pushed off all of the little inoculations from these complex memories. You just shove it to the back of the head. I mean, it's kind of a trauma response too, right? Like, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with that. But eventually there comes as in the movie, an avalanche of all of those things that I've been pushing off. It's because I haven't died. I haven't found what I need to die to and integrate and then resurrect into something greater on a smaller scale. So what happens is that we push it off and push it off and push it off until we have a crisis that the cross is already on us and we're not ready for it. And it's way too heavy. It's because we didn't take it in bite-sized pieces, little deaths every day, so that we could integrate and resurrect. And I think that's what we're seeing here with this. It was really cool. And then another note, something that you just said that just sparked some interest, is that I am a good person versus I'm not enough, is the scarcity mindset in contrast with God's good and plentiful creation, which is an interesting thing that you're seeing Riley have to wrestle with. Am I going to believe the scarcity, or am I going to believe the good?
Right. She's having a fall away from the garden. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I had a good meditation today as I was working, and just was kind of seeking the Holy Spirit, and had a really great meditation. And he kind of showed me, he's like, how often are we guilty of this, where we want to cut out a sliver of the church and say, hey, this is what it's going to be, and I'm going to curate all of these beliefs and experiences of the church, and this is what it's going to be for me. And I will excise anything that's not useful. And I want all of the favor and none of the fault. And so I can just pick and choose and build a body workshop instead of letting the church teach me who she is, and maybe more importantly, who I am. I want to get in there, and I want to force everything and just kind of stand over it and say, I call thee church, and thou shalt do thus and such, instead of me adopting the posture of a child and say, mother, who am I? Tell me that I might know. And I think that is, we see the same experience where the emotions are just awestruck with Riley's making her own decisions. So yeah, she's capable of it. You are participating in this, but you're not in control. She's a whole person, right? And
Exactly.
yeah, so I kind of had one of those moments with God where it's like, you too are guilty of this.
That's a hard thing to look in the face, man, but that is a good meditation. You're not wrong. Oh man, you know what? And this is funny too, because funny. It is the funny part of it's one of the first funny, hilarious parts of the movie too. The puberty alert, this disruption. Oh man, the first time I saw that, I was laughing my butt off because they saw it at the end of the last movie. what's this weird alarm that just emerged on the console? Like, puberty? What does that mean? Yeah, whatever. We'll ignore it for now, right?
Yep.
Then when this thing goes off, they're all asleep because puberty, appropriately so, happens overnight, right? It's just boom, and then all this immediate change begins to happen. All of this disruption happens all at once, and the representation of it in embodied form happens in the morning. But what the experience of the emotions kind of portrays is internally, everything just falls apart almost immediately, right? And not in like this kind of subtle way, and like a really like alarming haha, because there's an alarm going off. They all wake up and run to the console, and Joy's first impulse, not to figure out what's going wrong, is just to grab the alarm and shove that into oblivion too. Just here, dispose of the problem. Just
Right.
dispose of the problem. Make it go away. It's kind of like what you were talking about earlier, Sean, is like, me and mine, we're gonna stay. You and you over there, whatever you're, all that dysfunction junction, you over there. We with our nice church faces, we stay, right? Like that same kind of attitude, not necessarily as flippant as that, because I don't think Joy was trying to sabotage Riley by tossing the alarm out the window. But boy, it's the same thing. When you find a fence, you kind of have to ask yourself, why is this fence here? You don't just knock it over because you feel like it. Like, you should probably figure out why somebody put a fence there. Might be a bull on the other side or something. You don't know. You know what I mean? But it's like those kind of things, that lack of caution, it just like, it's so funny because it really reinforces, like we were talking about earlier, the naivety of Joy, that she thinks I could just dispense with this disruption and it'll all go away. It didn't go away. A literal wrecking ball comes through the front of HQ and just blasts the place apart. They tear the console out and then they leave it half done and just go, all right, bye, we're going on lunch. They're like, whoa, what's going on? Right? Just then Riley awakes. She's completely disoriented. She's like, what is going on? She immediately goes into these really flashed, overly expressive, like fits of emotion. The emotions try to touch the console, and just the slightest touch produces an excess of expression from Riley. How exactly right. Every single one of us have been of a teenager at some point. And I'm going to have a teenager soon. I don't know if you guys have teenagers yet, but I will have a teenager soon. And he's starting to get to this point right now, that all of this kind of hormonal imbalance is creeping its way in. And he has this kind of flash aggression or immediate sadness or really manically happy or whatever it is. He's just overly expressive in a way that is, he's always been a goofball, but like, he's getting to the point where that's starting to be subsumed into like, oh, you know, everything is just the most important thing in the world. Oh God, it's all ending. You know what I mean? Like that feeling. As they did a really good job for the parents of making that into a wonderfully comical moment. That was very refreshing as a parent.
And I love the mom's response. Well, this is what it's going to look like for the next 10 years.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. The mom knows. That was a good intuition into it too. She can say that's projecting forward.
You know, when you look at the parents though, that they were so they were ready for it. They were like, hey, this is what's going to happen, and it's going to be chaotic and it's going to be crazy, but we love her and we're going to be here for her, and we're going to look over the things that she can't control. You know, when thinking about that and thinking about how Joy treated the alarm, right? We see in our churches, right? Church hurt, like real cases of church hurt where there are people who are hurt. That's the alarm. And we just get rid of it. We're just like, oh, well, y'all are in sin. Y'all aren't Christians. Y'all, you know, go down the road to the liberal church if you don't want to act like us. And it's like, there's your alarm, right? And instead of heeding the alarm, too many times we just get rid of the problem. We're not getting rid of the problem. We're getting rid of the alarm. The problem is still there because the problem is us. But we're getting rid of the alarm. And then when chaos comes, we don't know what to do, right? And so the body's going crazy. But man, I see so many parallels with that. I could just see that, she grabs the alarm and chucks it. And it's like, well, you didn't fix the problem. You just are no longer aware of what's going on.
Yep.
Exactly. Great representation of suppression, right? Like that suppression of any experience. It's the same thing she's trying to do to the memories. It's the same thing she was trying to do to the other emotions, is to captivate and capture Riley. And it is immediately after this disruption and the destruction of HQ that all of the complex emotions, which are really the kind of meat of this movie and this conversation specifically, the meat's coming back toward the fact that these complex emotions, which are really, it's interesting because you have anxiety is kind of mixture of disgust, which is disgust sensitivity, but also sadness, because sadness is able to empathically understand, but also fear, right? And so you have a compilation of these three really distinct emotions coming together to create a new, more complex emotion. Anxiety is aware of the fact that it's a complex emotion and even is very condescending toward the other emotions, and immediately tries to pull the same action that Joy did in the first movie and become the tyrant, right? Not in a way that's not in a way that was like, I'm trying to make Riley happy only, right? But in a way where she's like, I need to capture the future. I need certainty, right? Anxiety is much more concerned with feeling certain and not being disrupted. And so she comes up with every potential disruption and tries to deal with them before they emerge. And she puts Riley into a crazy overdrive, right? Then the other emotions that emerge, which I think are really, really appropriate. They're very clever to use these emotions, right? Is you have anxiety, you have envy, which is a tiny thing, but with a huge attitude, this weird Napoleon complex, where she's like self-referential, right? And then you have embarrassment, which appropriately is literally the biggest thing in the room, right? It can't be missed. And then you have ennui, which is basically a nonchalant boredom, right? And then as a jest toward the end there of that sequence, you get nostalgia, who is not yet invited because she's not old enough to say, oh, I'm looking back at things. I think that was a really funny addition. That was another part where the parents, which I find ironic, that nostalgia doesn't feature in the heads of the parents either. Nostalgia seems to be relegated, which I find to be really interesting. I hope they do more with that if they make a third movie. But those are the range of emotions, the complex emotions that emerge. We have anxiety, who's a kind of compilation emotion. You have envy, who's a combination of kind of joy and disgust sensitivity, because it's a kind of self-referential naivety, but it's focused outward only for the utility of promoting self. That's what envy does.
Inverse of disgust, if that makes sense.
Yes. It's almost a disgust that doesn't know how to stop thinking about how to recreate what it likes, only for the sake of something else to be liking it. Right.
It's okay. So disgust is push that away. I don't want it anywhere near me. And envy is, I will take on external identities that are not actually core to me, just so that I can be in the inn.
Right. And what's interesting too is that I think envy is probably a strange name for it. I know why they did that, because it fits really well with the character that they gave it. But it's interesting because the same thing that envy does is the same thing that our natural inclination to mimic and emulate does, which is in fact drive our attention outward. Troy and I are going through a book right now by Ian McGilchrist called The Master and His Emissary. And in that book, there was a really remarkable line that I got to today, where he was talking about if mimicry is the greatest kind of compliment, mimicry is also the greatest kind of mockery. It is both and, right? And so our ability to, and our affinity to emulate those things that we admire is both out of the desire to receive the characteristics of the thing if we're integrated, or to steal the characteristics of the thing if we are not integrated. And what that means is envy wants to gather virtues without the service of earning the virtues. It wants the good because it's good, but it doesn't want to be good in order to get it. It wants to kind of steal it.
Wow.
So it's like assimilation versus appropriation, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I think that. Yeah, I
Mhm.
think that's a good way of looking at it.
yeah, I was just thinking of like, you know, the idea of culturally appropriating something, which is, you know, super big today. And it's like, well, I want to present the virtues of these cultures, but I actually don't belong to these cultures.
Right. And I think it's one of the, it actually points me back to, and this is something you might have something to say about, Amber, is the last of the commandments is literally not to do that. Right. And I find it very appropriate that that's the last of the commandments, because it's kind of a summary statement of what would happen if you violated the other horizontal commandments that come prior to it. Ultimately, the culmination of those violations would come to something like, I love and hate at the same time. That's what jealousy is. You know, like it's I love what you have and I hate you that you're not me. Something like that. What do you think, Amber?
Yeah, I think so. I think that is really interesting that it also comes at the end of the how to live together in community. Like, you know, the last pushing away, the last refusal to integrate, the last removing yourself from community.
Yeah.
Really, yeah. I'm still, give me another second. I'm still spinning that around in my head. But yeah, that's kind of
No
where
worries.
my thoughts are going.
I like this. Cosmic Septic says, disgust keeps you away from dangers. That's what anxiety claimed to do. That she, fear guards Riley against the things that she can see, and anxiety thinks her role is explicitly to guard Riley against things she can't see. Disgust keeps you away from dangers in a way that, it's very similar. You find something to be off-putting and you're more likely to avoid it. I think that's true. Envy blurs potential dangers, which I think is true also. For example, I should feel disgust at sin. Being envious of a person may cause me to ignore sin in them or in myself as I pursue them. I think that's almost exactly what I was trying to say when I mentioned the last commandment, is that it kind of it brings to mind that you're making more than one mistake by following envy. It's not just that envy is the mistake. Envy is almost like the ship in which you can fit many, many mistakes.
Yeah, well, and I think too, I was thinking about this because I answered a question from somebody earlier about the law, and actually I've answered several of them in the last couple of days. But in the Ten Commandments, it's about preservation of life. It's about the preservation of your relationship with Yahweh and your preservation of your relationship into the community, and how those two are interdependent amongst each other. And when you violate one of these things that are in what we call the Ten Commandments, that is breaking your faith with the community. That really is, because a lot of those things, if you're taking those things that you covet in this time when Moses is writing this, you're taking away their life, you're taking away their livelihood, you're taking away their identity in the community. You are interfering with their participation in community, and that was everything. You didn't. If you had no place, that was isolation, and that was death. That was
Right.
It was the most severe. So protection of the community was the utmost, because without it, the individual cannot survive, and that was one of the greatest things that you could do, was to isolate someone from the community and remove that protection, therefore endangering their life. So that's my thoughts on the last commandment. So, and it almost seems like this mindset of not preserving life and not preserving community. I think you guys are right. We see that playing out in the church now. We kind of don't recognize it as the same thing because we're in a very different context. But it is the same thing when we do these. It's still a problem, and still doing things that hurt the community and isolating people and pushing people out because they don't wear their good mask, or they're not like us, or they make me uncomfortable, or I don't like whatever list of things I don't like about them. We are cutting them off from the source of life. And, it is, I think, something that our modern church really needs to take a look at, no matter who you are, because when you isolate the ones who don't fit, you're taking away their life, really.
Yeah, you're minimizing who you define as neighbor, and that's that's working against what Christ describes as neighbor, anyone who has need of you, right? The other is the one that has need of you. So being able to draw that closer and closer in is actually the wrong way. Your definition of neighbor should be more and more expansive, because love does no harm to a neighbor, right? That's what Paul talks about, right? And starting with envy as the last commandment, and then looking back at all of the other commandments that are horizontal, it starts there. It starts with that last commandment, right? That's the seed of all of those outward expressions.
It's really interesting. Oh, sorry.
Good.
But I think it's just really interesting too, because there's such a reason why God centers on the least of the poor, the widow, the orphan, because in a community, when those at the very bottom are cared for, everyone is cared for all the way up. So when your focus is caring for the very minimum, the very bottom layer, the ones that are forgotten and outcast, the entire community thrives because no one's left out.
Right. At least the intended state of a function like that would be like that. I mean, there are ways in which if you fetishize the little person, or the person who's outlandish or marginalized or whatever, you'll get something very similar to the weird woke mind thing that's going on right now, where there's just this like fetishization of what is different or what is victimized, and that has its own downfall. But in a properly organized and functioning community, you definitely have the top caring for the bottom and the middle caring in both directions. That's exactly how it should operate. It's wonderful. That's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, you see that in some of the early church fathers talking about how the salvation of the rich depends on their alms to the poor, and the poor, we should be grateful for the poor, because in asking for alms, they're actually handing out salvation, right? It's that the top should be caring for the low, and the low is caring for the top by being in the low, this is why I think Jesus is saying the poor will always be among you. We always need that object lesson. So if we, as the wealthiest nation in the world, and potentially individuals within that community, are top 1%, we really need to understand our role is that's our salvation is in caring for the poor, and taking what is the other, the stinky, the dirty, the naked, the hungry, the oppressed, the suppressed, and bringing them and welcoming them in.
Yeah, I think that pride says, like what Paul had, was saying. I think it's what 1 Corinthians 12, where he's talking about the body. Pride says, I have no need of you, right? Like, this person is different from me. They do things differently. I don't like the way they do them. I have no. Humility would say, what need could you have of me? Like, this is the church, right? These are the people of God, and humility looks at your talents and says, I don't add up, right? Like I'm not enough. And so I think instead of trying to be the person calling the shots, we should kind of be or at least most Christians should try to just be the people who are there to serve. Right. And, I'm reminded of, is it Paralandra, where Paralandra and Malacandra say to, small one, take peace in your smallness. It's kind of like that idea of like, rejoice, I have no need of you, but I want you.
Right.
Right.
I am infinitely superfluous. Love me because you don't need me at all. That way your love can be plain bounty. That's wonderful. That's exactly it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, we spend so much time thinking that God would love us because we're useful, and not enough time thinking that he loves us because we're precious, right?
Right.
We esteem ourselves to be tools when we are a treasure. And so the usefulness that we have is just that God wants to show us off and to glorify his body through us participating. There's nothing that I have that he needs.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Else, I think I forget which book it was in, but elsewhere C.S. Lewis wrote, if God chooses to need me, it is because I need to be needed.
Yeah.
Because God lacks nothing. I add exactly nothing to him. So if he chooses to need me, it is because I needed to be needed. And I think that's right. Especially as a man. Like I've never had the experience of being a woman, so I don't really know how to map that one personally. But as a man, I can say it is one of the central facets of a man's fulfillment in identity to be required. Like to have that place of like, if I don't show up, my place will, like the things that I'm the pillar that I am, if my pillar is gone, the weight will sag and the thing will begin to suffer and fall apart. Right? Like for a man to not have that place, you're like withering on the vine, like it's something that really makes you, not everything else, but you fall apart. To have that like lack in one's experience, to not be needed, is almost identical to having no purpose. Right. And it's not that God's purpose is that, without us, like a lot of people, I think in their cynicism, would look at this and say, why did God need man? Does God need to be worshiped? Does God need it? God doesn't have need. Need is a foreign concept to God's experience, period. God is perfect, meaning he lacks nothing. God is complete in and of himself, lacks nothing. You add exactly nothing to him. And so your purpose is not in fulfilling God. That is not our purpose. But our purpose is found in the need, right? We know that. Well, maybe we don't know that. We experience that when the lack is there. Like when we feel like we're not just unwanted, but insignificant because we're not even needed. There's nothing that we add to anything. Not just that you don't add to God, that you seemingly don't add to the ongoing event we call real life. There are people who have come to a place where that's how they feel. I add nothing. It would be better if I wasn't here. Better for whom? Please hear this. Better for whom? For you? If you didn't exist, you could hardly benefit from that. And all of us need to be ready to admit and acknowledge that when somebody else ceases to be, their lack leaves a real, genuine hole. The same we were talking about earlier with the circle of shields or the circle of elephants. That lack creates a genuine void, right? There's a U-sized hole in everyone's reality. And if you don't rise up to fill it, we all suffer that, right? That's why our sin is what it is. It's actually a cosmic tragedy that we sin. It's not just you. It's everything. The earth itself, creation itself groans under the weight of our deficit and disorder. It's not even just the persons. It's the place. Everything. The stage, the setting suffers. You know, so it's like being aware of this and being ready to engage in a proper way is going to be something that builds way more than ourselves. To quote that great philosopher Michael Jackson, I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. That's something that literally anybody can do. Literally anyone. You could be like, hey, I'm in some sense obviously insufficient. What's something that I could do something about, that I should do something about, that I actually would do something about, and then go do that thing. And one piece at a time, you'll make the entire world a better place. You literally can do that. It is within your grasp to be a difference in not just your own internal reality, but everything. This is the other half of that thing that we've said 1,000 times on here about stories. You are not the main character of your own disjointed story, my friend. You are not. You are a key player in the ongoing story we all share. All of you, every single one of us is that same thing.
And
all
you are of
center.
vital importance.
That's right. All is center because God is the center and God is everywhere. We're clipping this part. Yes, expect that I'll be grabbing some gold out of this wonderful treasure chest here.
I'm not sure
Yeah.
who it was. Maybe it was Martin Luther who said that God doesn't need your good works, but your neighbor does. And I think that's beautiful and fits in exactly with what you're saying. That we need you here. God doesn't need you. There's nothing that you add to him. But if he needed you, you would be a servant to exploit. But he doesn't need you. So you are a son that he wants to exalt. And that is just glory. All of it's for us. It doesn't benefit him. It benefits us, and he delights in us.
Yes, you are partially responsible for incarnating God.
Amen.
That's the thing, right? Is that you are the means by which your neighbor meets God.
Yes.
Like that's the role of the 10 Commandments. That's why Jesus contrasts and equates love of God with love of neighbor.
Yes. The second is likened unto it. That's right. The second commandment is the second command, or the second greatest commandment is likened unto the first commandment because it is the expression of the first commandment.
Yes.
That's exactly right. You cannot love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength and not love your brother. According to John, you're false for that.
Yes.
You cannot love God who you do not see if you cannot love the brother who you do see.
Right, because
woe to you.
Yeah, that's because they're made in his image. Like how can I love God and hate his image? It doesn't work. That's the paradox. You've created the paradox. Is there anyone that you hate? That's the part that you hate God.
That's right.
And
that's why
exactly
when you hate yourself, you're hating God.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And almost
you're
to
made in his image
a
too.
larger degree. Yeah, almost to a larger degree, because it's the commandment is to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And this self-deprecating thing that I think a lot of people have gotten kind of stuck into is that if I learn how to despise and insult myself enough, then I'll be humble. That is not true. That is not real. That is not real at all. Another C.S. Lewis quote: being humble is not thinking less of myself. It's thinking of myself less. Right? Allowing the space for the other to exist in that level of importance and to elevate the other, not to diminish yourself. Right? There's a natural kind of seesaw of values that occur, but the other is not lifted just because you degrade yourself. You could both just be valueless. Right? In order that the other person be elevated, you have to lift them up. This is not merely a decreasing of oneself. It is I must decrease that he may increase. Right? that there's still this level of like, two things can't be at the top, can't serve two masters. That's fine. That's true. Right? Your values kind of have this pecking order. You're going to have that. Others have to fit in somewhere. My pastor gave a really, really cool acronym. He said, if you want to understand your relationship and your relationships, you can look to joy. There it is. J would be Jesus first, others second, yourself included. Right? So all three of those elements come together. That's how you experience joy, is to put things in the right places, to put them in the right places. Right? Oh man. Okay. Before we get bogged down, we have to kind of like pick apart a couple of other pieces here.
Could I tie this back into the story?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, if you have a view of yourself that is not what God views you as, it is because you are doing what Joy was doing, which is kicking out all of the thoughts and experiences that don't validate what you think you ought to be. And if you think that you suck, then you're creating that image. And so what you need to do is not be doing that and integrate all of these thoughts into your beliefs. That way you would better reflect the way that God sees you.
Yes. It takes seriously that you are a sub-creator.
Yes. Yes. A co-author. Yes, exactly. So the next thing that I wanted to kind of explore a little bit, and we're this episode is going so quickly. I'm just, oh man. So the next thing that I wanted to explore a little bit is when she gets to the camp, the first thing that anxiety tries to pull apart is, you know, her relationship with not only the future, but her relationships in general. Anxiety is capable of seeing potential, but she can't see the purpose of what is in relation to what could be. And so she's willing to sacrifice everything that Riley is, everything Riley has, all of her extended relationships and existing relationships with her friends and her family. She's willing to sacrifice all of that on the altar of potential, and sees, here's this girl, and we obviously look up to her. She's obviously worth looking up to because she's a great leader. She's someone we could and should emulate. And instead of putting a proper boundary around that emulation, it quickly turns from venerating somebody who deserves respect to worshiping that person. Riley kind of plays with this line really uncomfortably. All at once, actually, when she first meets this person, you get this anxiety response where anxiety is actually, let's say, showing the other emotions a glimpse of how it is that she operates by showing these nasty fantasies, which aren't really, they're like mental nightmares about all the things that could go wrong in the future. I call them ugly fantasies. That's what they are. They're just like, they're hideous parodies of what could be, right? Not that they're terribly inaccurate. They're just the wrong focal point, right? If you want to aim up, the thing you don't do is avoid down. You actually have to aim. Anxiety doesn't know how to aim. It knows how to eliminate, right? And so it puts you in, that's why it puts you into overdrive. There's simply too much to focus on. If you're run by anxiety, you have an excess of attention, which means that you have no focus, right? You can't focus because there's simply too much to attend to. You cannot confront the future as such. You can aim. You can aim, but you cannot confront the future as the future. You're not there. You don't know it. And so you have to try to imagine and fill all the gaps. You will never, you cannot fill all the gaps of the future. You have to accept it as it comes to you and participate in and with it moment to moment. That doesn't mean you have to be unprepared and impulsive, because people that have, let's say, lessened anxiety, who don't think about the future at all, boy, do they blow it. They really do. They know how to blow it real well. But that doesn't mean that the opposite is true, that if you're hyper fixated on going forward, this is people that are overachievers and things like that, perfectionists, right? So instead of an optimist like Joy, she's a perfectionist, and she's literally just tearing apart everything that would have been good and productive in Riley is then being sacrificed on the altar of what if. And I think that response is, in some sense, unfortunately, logical. It is not an illogical thing to be concerned about the future, right? It is actually almost a logical problem to be focused on the future, because what you're trying to do is reason with a thing that has no face.
It's like aiming at being a perfected machine instead of being organically in relationship with both the present, the past, and the future.
Exactly. Right. And it's yeah, it's inorganic, right? It's decomposing. It's the anxiety is trying to let's say like I don't even know, trying to condense the future in a way that makes it a place that's not even worth going to, if that makes sense.
Right, and it makes it a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like it because of all it's willing to sacrifice, there's less and less of a positive future you can imagine. And so the nightmares become not just or daymares, because they're, like you said, it's the inverse of a fantasy. They become more and more of reality. She loses friends, she loses the opportunity. Like, it's letting anxiety in control like that, and the ability to sacrifice everything for the sake of an imagined nightmarish future to avoid, you end up going right down that path.
Yeah.
Right.
And anxiety says something insidious to Joy when Joy is trying to stop her. She says, I'm doing this for you, right? Don't you want Riley to be happy? And like you said, when you don't have this aim, you end up tilting at windmills, right? You're just going after things that may not ever obtain, and you're just fighting, like you said, the future as such, not aiming at anything, so you never get anything done.
Right. And what you had falls apart in its place. Riley gets to camp with all the potential to be one of the best players on the ice. And as soon as anxiety takes over, she becomes one of the worst players on the ice. And not just because her skill is gone, like her skill's still there. She's just a really crappy teammate. And she does badly because she herself is not the team. She's insufficient. She's not the team by herself. The team is not Riley plus whoever happens to be there. Riley is supposed to be a member of the team. And instead, she tries to be the team itself because she's trying to prove herself, right? She's trying to fill that gap and make the future what she thinks that it's supposed to be. There's one point at which anxiety like firmly takes over the console and starts, trying to, and this is still in the initial stages of establishing who anxiety is and why she's there, right? Anxiety takes the console, and immediately you see Riley's personality and her expression are like really weirdly out of place. She starts stammering and blurting and talking way too fast, and she gives this ugly guilt-driven apology, and she starts trying to win Val over by buttering her up, pleasing. She's trying to butter Val up, which is the person that she's aiming at, right? That older kid that she's trying to emulate, who's now the hero. This kind of hero worship kind of leads people, let's say, instead of aiming at trying to be like a hero because they're a good leader, she's being guided by that envy to try to be Val, right? And this is one of those things, is like, you have competition with people who are better than you, not because they're better than you, but because you want to take the space that they're occupying. Right? It's okay that someone is better than you at something if what you're trying to do is get better. But if what you're trying to do is not get better, but to be better than them, now you have competition. Now you have a problem. No longer can you work together. Now you need to let's say, consume what the person has and dispense with what you don't want from it, which is something we went over on another episode of vampiric pattern. That's something where you're trying to take without giving, right? Giving and taking place is how things work. Taking without giving place is not how things work. Real simple, right? So she starts to people please. She starts exaggerating herself. She starts exaggerating. I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen. Oh, I'm so repentant, And it's like Val being a rather good person, and I'm glad that they didn't make her look up to somebody who ended up being a bully. I think that was fantastic. But what they did do is allow for Val to kind of try to ease the problem, right? And what you have actually is, because anxiety like steps in and throws herself at Val, is like, oh, please, I need your approval so badly, that she breaks the promises that she made to her friends, right? And she starts to violate all the expectations. This is the reason why anxiety needs to dispense with Riley's sense of self, so that there's no guilt-laden obstacle between her and doing all these things, right? Anxiety is literally trying to rework Riley from the top to bottom. And the first step is to get rid of Riley and exile the other emotions, right? And so you have this, like, that's the next stage in the actual progression of the story, which is really, really deep. She takes not the memories. She's not taking the memories like Joy was and exiling those. She's literally taking the rest of the emotions, and first off, literally puts them in a bottle, bottles them up. It's hilarious. Embarrassment grabs all of them and shoves them in a vial and closes it off, and then dispenses, bottle and all, by putting them in this kind of prison of the mind, the subconscious area, right? And kind of dispenses with them and puts them in with deep, dark secrets and embarrassing things that Riley doesn't want anybody to see, right? So anxiety knows exactly what to do to dispense with something, but she doesn't know how to build anything up.
I have a question. Listening to what you're describing, it just hit me. It sounds like anxiety is trying to rewrite Riley into a narcissist, because a narcissist doesn't see people, it sees tools, it sees extensions of self, and self becomes the entire universe. And because there's only me, I can exploit everything around me.
Yeah. Something like that. I think anxiety can see deficit everywhere except in the mirror. Anxiety
Right.
is kind of a narcissist. Yeah. I think that's true. I don't necessarily think that somebody who is driven by anxiety is necessarily narcissistic, but they definitely do become utilitarian in some sense, because
well, I
they're
wasn't
aiming at alleviating that.
I wasn't trying to equate anxiety, or I wasn't trying to equate someone who suffers from anxiety becomes a narcissist. I'm saying in this narrative, the types of choices anxiety is doing is trying to make Riley a narcissist. So differentiate those two. Suffering from anxiety is different than being a narcissist. But it seemed in this narrative that what anxiety is attempting to do and rewrite is this, the storm, all of it, like it's sucking everything. The whole cosmos is getting sucked into Riley because of anxiety, right? Because everything is my utility. My friends are my means of getting closer to my goal. This person that I'm worshiping instead of just venerating is the means by which I am in. Like everything becomes utilitarian. So I wonder if maybe that's a better way of putting it, is that what anxiety is doing is making Riley purely utilitarian. And then different ways of doing that is, I don't have access to what I need. Anxiety. What is it? Oh my gosh. Now I just lost my train of thought. Anyways, and narcissism is an outgrowth of that utilitarian approach.
Well, as someone who suffers with anxiety, I think that anxiety can really cause us to have an involuntary narcissism, where our problems become the biggest problems in the world, not because they're more important than anyone else's, but because you can't see anything else. And so everything just is closing in on you. It's not that you become the whole universe, it's that your universe shrinks to just you. And so
Right.
I think that there is like an unfortunate involuntary form of narcissism where it's just, I can't see past this. And
Yeah. It's a blindness. I agree with that. It's not necessarily that, yeah. I think it's the right way to look at it. It's like your ability to see everything else is inhibited because it's like there's just this wall of what if, and so that you can't see past that. You just can't. And you can't, like, if you're entirely internally focused, you can't empathize outwardly because there's just not enough attention to go around.
Right.
There just isn't.
It's relegating relationships to left brain function. Like,
Yeah, to go
components.
back to McGilchrist's book.
McGilchrist.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. There's there's also the interesting dynamic that's created as soon as the fundamental emotions are gone. All of the other emotions begin to kind of fall in line with anxiety's plan. The same way that the other emotions seem to be on board to just riding the curtail of joy's intentions. All the other complex emotions seem to be doing the same thing for anxiety. And that's why she so quickly gets away with it, is because they see very quickly, oh, there's utility in utilitarianism. Wow. Oh, this is so immediately functional, because they also can't see the future, right? Joy aims at a future, but she can't see deficit. Anxiety aims at a future and she can't see good, right? And so that's why, again, they require one another. They just do. They have to fill each other's gaps because both has those blind spots. And so in the same way that I need you to inform me because I can't see everything, and what do I know? Also, you can't see everything. What do you know? The two of us together can see a lot more. We can know a lot more. We can build a much clearer picture of the thing around us and the thing we're both swimming in, right? We can make sense of it. The crazy, like, first thing that begins to happen is as soon as anxiety pulls something off, the first thing that she does beyond exiling the emotions and dispensing with Riley's sense of self is she goes back down to the belief systems and implants her own memory there, like the memory that she just accomplished, because anxiety has its function. It works for something, right? Which is, you have to be aware of negative potential futures. You can't, like, avoid them if you don't know that they're there, And so in some sense, that is the utility. That is what it is. She wasn't lying when she said, I'm here to protect Riley from what she can't see. She absolutely is. But in isolation, she can't see much either, right? And so when she goes down to the belief system and drops that orange memory in the pool, this new string that's really like harsh and electric and shocking and kind of, like, it looks like a lightning bolt. It looks like something that could really harm you. That grows up in place of these really beautiful, delicate white strings of belief. There's this, like, chaotic and unsettled belief that arises in the new thing. And while that's rising, the other expressions of emotion are being suppressed. And this is something where this is, let's say, honesty time, right? One of the things that I don't like is that I can be a very angry person. I am not a person who expresses anger much, but that's not because I don't have anger. It's because I have a tendency to avoid anger because I don't like the Josh that occurs when anger's touching the console, right? I dislike that person entirely. That's not to say that person has no place. That's to say I dislike him, which is not the same thing. I am not unwilling to let anger touch the console. I simply disdain when it happens, but sometimes it's necessary. But I therefore have a very difficult time of discerning when it is necessary, because I try to withhold it at all costs. I very rarely let anger out of that mental prison. And that means that by the time he comes out, there's 1,001 things attached to him that probably shouldn't be. Right? So that's what happens to a person. And this is just one example of one emotion in my own personal experience that I have in fact treated this way. And I've seen the fruit of treating it that way is when it comes out, it becomes unruly and uncontrollable. It does come with a kind of avalanche, right? And so it puts me beside myself. And if somebody finally has done enough to make me react angrily, boy, have they asked really nicely over and over to me to get to that point, right? But by the time I get to that point, I know for certain that it is necessary to do so. And so in some sense, there is a guard. And in another sense, it probably would be more useful to allow small acts of spillage than to create a dam that holds up miles and miles of flood behind it, so that when somebody finally throws a rock hard enough and cracks the thing, it destroys everything in its path, right? Because if I'm the kind of person, I'm not a small guy. Full disclosure, I'm not a small guy. I'm a pretty big dude. I don't want to hurt somebody, but I feel like if somebody pushed me enough, I would probably be in a kind of Hulk mode where damage could be done to me or to someone else or both. That's something that makes me aware of the fact, and I actively try to remedy that. But I see it in myself as an active weakness that I do not allow for anger when sometimes it's necessary. And sometimes when it's necessary, it comes in excess because I make those allowances.
Yeah. It's like we become passive. What you said about being beside yourself. It's like I am no longer the thing that's interacting with the reality around me. Something less than human is. And it's like that's the feeling of being beside yourself. Why? Because now you're passive, right? And I to tie it back a little bit into the movie is that you see that progression with Riley through the two movies is that quite often she was passive to the emotions. And what you see with the progress at the beginning of the movie is that she's making decisions like picking up with her friend actively without being overtaken by an emotion. But like what you're talking about, this moment of I've held it back, I've held it back, I've held it back, I've held it back, and then I am unable to control what happens next. And I'm standing there going, what did I unleash? Right? It's a beside yourself. That has happened once to me. I did not like that person either. And I am so grateful my wife was next to me and her touch was the thing that brought me back to behind my eyes. That was the weirdest thing ever. Like I was not seeing through my eyes. Something else was. And it brought me back in. And I don't know how else to describe that, but it was, yeah, I know what that's like.
Yeah, I have a similar experience with sadness. When I was probably 11 or 12, my puppy died, and of course that's a young age, and I was very close to my dog, and she was a year old and got run over by a car, and I was inconsolable for probably weeks, and I just exiled sadness after that. I don't feel sadness. I try not to. I try to avoid anything that would make me sad. And to my shame, when I see sadness in someone else, I need to leave because I see that danger. And so I'm uncomfortable with sadness. I'm uncomfortable with an expression of sadness because I don't know what to do, because I don't have empathy for that, because I don't know how to integrate that. And so with me, I do have anxiety about things that would make me sad, because the idea for me is like, how would I ever be consoled? You know, if something, God forbid, were to happen to my wife or my kids, I don't know how it would go on, because I don't have that relationship with sadness.
Yeah. I think that what's interesting too is that what all of us just described is exactly what we were lamenting in the church, is that when some part gets exiled, when we see it in the other, what's arising is not empathy, but our disgust sensitivity. When I see an angry person, I go, God, not me. You know what I mean? I do the same thing. And it's because I know that I'm a rather angry person, but I have that locked up. And in some sense, having the ability to be that monster, but having it bridled is a strength. But then how much of that strength and bridling is actually just my cowardice, right? Because I'm afraid of what it would do. Just like you're talking about, I'm afraid of being sad because I don't know where the end of it would be. I have no idea where its boundaries live, and I think I'd drown in it. You know, it's like that's the same thing. I feel like it's the exact same thing. You know, I think there's a lot of depth to that. That could be an episode of its own, is, you know, just exiling emotions and recognizing that when they're locked away, we actually can't acknowledge them. And when we can't acknowledge them, we see them as weaknesses in other people when they are manifest. You know, people that are afraid to be vulnerable see vulnerability as weakness. People that are afraid to be angry see angry as impulsivity. You know, like that I think that's what it is we have this negative perception, and it's because, you know, the same way that Riley would look at somebody who's alone and say, I'm not alone. Being alone is the greatest evil. So not being alone is the greatest good. And they aim everything around that.
So what?
And in the first movie, you know, when Anger was at the console because Joy wasn't there, and so then things that Riley was doing was angry. I can identify with that because, like, if I see somebody crying, I can feel like the emotion that's there, that's at the console, is fear and disgust, and it's not what I want to feel, but I don't have any other emotion to be able to empathize, and so that I just, when you were saying that, that's what I thought of, so I shared.
So with these things that have just been shared, is it, like, I hate to use this word because it's been so abused, but a safe space in proper community where you kind of see it in the movie near the end where the friends forgive Riley and reach out to her, and it allows for her to relegate, just as the same time internally Joy is reaching out to integrate anxiety. Is the means by which we learn to let each one of those things have a place and trickle instead of flood in community that allows for that flood to happen without rejection.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Yeah. I think this is going to go back to the conversation about having a good Ezra Connecto and a good community, because anxiety can turn us into trying to be our own Ezra Connecto and disconnecting from all of those people that can surround us and help us learn how to engage and learn how to do all those things and learn how to incorporate those things and give us a safe outlet to, get rid of those, or express some of those parts that we struggle with, or to help mentor and teach us where we're lacking in knowing how to process certain emotions, or to really come in and help us become more fully integrated, because we have a safe place that is protected to engage with those things with other people, and then we can also step back and let somebody else and help somebody else process those things together. So you kind of create this this whole support idea where one needs help, this others step in, and then I step out and help others, because I have been Ezra Connectoed myself, so I have a better idea of how to do it.
That's right. And I think this is let's say on a spiritual basis in our own personal Christian walks. The love that we give to other people is the love that we've experienced. And if the love that we've experienced is backbiting and manipulative, kind of by proxy, what we're going to do is going to have elements of that. But if what you've experienced is the love of God, which is like an unending bounty, which again has no need of you and just loves you from that bounty, then you can genuinely love other people in self-sacrifice, and your self-sacrifice becomes worth what it is, because you're sacrificing from a self that actually loves itself. If you don't love yourself, but you sacrifice of yourself, the best you can give to someone else is your own garbage. Because that you can't treat yourself like trash and then give of yourself to someone else and expect that that's a profound gift. You think it's garbage. And so it kind of comes off flippantly a lot of the time. It comes off in a way where, like somebody who doesn't love themselves, who tries to like displace that dislike for themselves by over loving other people, those other people end up not seeing that sacrifice for the value that it is. And those people end up, because, what we call that is a people pleaser, right? A person who sees in themselves nothing of genuine value. So they try to like, let's say, subsidize that need for value by being useful for other people. It's a huge trap from mothers, I find. Mothers fall into this trap when their children move out. They're like, I have no purpose anymore because I'm simply not useful in this capacity, right? As a man, I can see that I need to be needed in that long-term associated sense too. But in the short term, that functional thing for the need and the strength and the support, that's something that for me kind of makes that experience of purpose really like tangible, right? For a mother, it's that needing to be needed on that long-term emotional basis that makes them feel purposeful and desired and needed and valuable and, all that kind of thing. That's like those holes, what they do, I think when you start to notice that something has been removed, you then, it's like absence makes the heart grow fonder, or you don't know what you have till it's gone sort of situation, right? You don't recognize how much of a gap that it leaves because you are never fostering any of the other things that could be bringing along the closure for that phase, right? For her parents to notice that puberty was coming and be like, oh yeah, this is what we need to prepare for. That's good parenting, because they didn't mourn the loss of the little girl. They welcomed the addition of the teenager, which is a different approach. They fostered her forward rather than lamenting her loss. Some parents don't do this. Some parents, it is the theme of the devouring mother in a lot of stories and things like that, is the mother who won't let go of the infant and therefore infantizes the hero, locks him up till he's useless. You will rely on me and will be mutually useful because I am useful and you are full of need, and I'll fill those gaps for you, but you can't leave me.
I have a question about what you said about they don't mourn the loss of the child, but only welcome in the new. As a parent, is there a balance to that? Like nostalgia, like there is I am losing the sweet little child, but I'm gaining a equal, or I'm gaining a contender. It's, for me, it's a both and. Like there is, I was describing it to my daughter. I was like, there are little deaths every day where I see you're growing in independence, and I love that you're growing in independence, but it means that you're less dependent on me, right? And I'm going, that's a little death for me. There's a little death there, and I have to mourn that so that I can be present to the wonderful warrior that is now present. So that, I guess it's not necessarily pushback. It's going, I think there's room for both.
Right. Well,
Yeah,
I think. Well,
just the one who's okay.
Just a second, Amber, because I want to correct. Thank you, Troy, because that corrects me. I misspoke. It's not that they don't mourn; it's that they appropriately allow for that mourning to give passage. You can't. This is what I think is what people do: is they get either stuck in mourning the loss, and therefore the loss is all they see, or they refuse to acknowledge it. Yep. I think that's mostly what I meant. So I probably misspoke. Sorry. Go ahead, Amber.
I was just going to say, it's just someone who's just been through this process. And as a child in college, Troy is right that you have to encourage to, in their direction. You have to support them and embrace who they are and embrace their choices and support them, and as much, but you also have to go through this process individually and as the parents of honoring that which is passing away, because it is closing a chapter. It is putting aside something that they will never look at you the same again. They will never need you the same way again. They won't stop looking at you with love and respect if you are, try to do that well, but it will never be the same again. And so there has to be an honoring of that, but it should never impair your child's journey forward and your support and your encouragement of their journey forward. Yeah, there has to be a balance. You can't do it one without the other. Either way is unhealthy.
That would be the extremes. Yeah.
As the father of boys, I had to go through a death when I stopped being a playmate to my kids, and now I'm a moral authority. And when they don't need a moral authority anymore, then I will be a man. And when they become men, then I'll become a friend. And it's like, in order for them to grow, I have to go through these deaths and they're real losses, right? I mourn them, and I have pictures of my kids when they were little on all of my screens. And it's not because I don't love them now. It's because I cherish those memories. And I won't get them back. And so that part of me had to die in order for me to continue being relevant to them.
Right. And it's giving way. That's exactly what we were talking about earlier, is giving way for what is to come, and not in a way that's irreverent or dismissive of what was. Because like you said, it's like you cherish that, and you can and you should cherish those things, as long as it doesn't breed in yourself a resentment for their loss. That's the thing to be avoided, is that feeling of resentment. And this is the same look, this story is a coming of age story for Riley. We're all here as parents going, no, this is also a coming of age story for me. Because the parents have several coming of age stories, right? We went through the same thing at that point. And the teenager will eventually become an adult. And like you said, Sean, and Amber, like, you guys are nailing it. The way that this is coming together is the parents have to give way for that. The child has to suffer the loss of the parents as a superhero, because that's ultimately what happens with Riley in this movie in the very beginning, is the parents give way to the friendships. The friendships gave way to opportunity. Opportunity gave way to have integration of all the relationships back together. She reconciles with her friends and goes back to being in good relationship, not only with her friends, but better relationship to her parents. Because she recognizes, I think, more subconscious, less explicit with that, but she recognizes that what they were doing was trying to bolster her forward, right? They were being the supportive parents that she needed, right? They were doing what she needed, not what she was asking them to do, which is like, back off, stop, you're embarrassing me. Like that impulse to shove away and like establish one's own self as separate is, I think, in some sense, a virtue and a drawback. It always is. It's always both. You know what I mean? But recognizing that the child also has to suffer that death of, now my parents have nothing more to offer me because they've become peers, is something that's very difficult to confront as well. And I think personally, I didn't have to confront that until I was like already married, because I think the world of my mother. You know what I mean? And she's wonderful. She's incredibly crazy, strong, fiery, redheaded woman. You know what I mean? Like, she's just like, she is in my mind like a kind of superhero. She's got flaws for days, but like, she's like an impenetrable fortress of awesome in my heart. You know what I mean? Like, so the first time that she ever came to me and just cried and was asking me to pray with her and give her counsel, because it's like, I do a lot of pastoral ministry and stuff, and like that lends itself to being that person for people. It's different to do that for your parent. It's very different. Some children are kind of forced into that way too early, and it makes them resentment that makes them fueled with resentment toward their parent. They almost have this avoidance. I didn't have that. I had the opposite problem. I didn't get engaged in that until far too late. And it actually broke me a little to see my mom so vulnerable before me and asking me with tears in her eyes, like, what am I supposed to do with this, man? What am I supposed to do with this? And for that to be the instance in which your parents first look at you and go, what's your advice? What do you think, kid? You know, like, man, that was wild. That tore me up a bit. But then afterward, like I learned so much about my relationship to my mom. I learned so much about like her shortcomings and her personality in a way that those corners had never been exposed to me before. But her vulnerability made me that much more in love with how awesome she is. You know, it was like, that's crazy that you just like allow all of this to flood out, and not in a way where you're like trying to make me feel bad or anything like that. It's just like, this is where I am. I don't know what to do about it. What do you see that I don't see? You know, and that was one of the reasons, that was the first time I had ever encountered this idea that like mothers or adults, let's say, but specifically mothers, and I've seen this in other mothers since then, because I had started to notice it as a pattern in that way, is that mothers, when they lose the babies in the home, have to go through in this phase where they're transition, they call it empty nesting or whatever, where it's like the now what problem, you know? And so all of the emotion and vulnerability that would be focused on trying to foster your children now needs to be dropped into a special focus of fostering that later year of relationship to the husband for the wife, and to the wife for the husband. That's now your entire ministry and mission field. It's your whole, like, the whole picture kind of revolves inwardly around that. Like you can't let the lack be the thing that you notice most, because it's not like everything's been stripped. Like there are some people who, when their children move out, they're widows or widowers or something like that, they're in a very different situation. So I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about the general average rule of thumb for something like this is you're kind of having to confront the now what problem. You know what I mean? Which is that's a whole other level of difficulty and anxiety and everything else, and mourning and loss and I don't know, and uncertainty, and you don't know how to look at the future. You don't know what story you live in, and that, you know, when you don't know what story you live in, you lose aim, and when you lose aim, that's where depression really hits.
Yep. That'll break marriages too. When you've
Absolutely.
if you're emulating the devouring mother and the child leaves, you have nothing for your affection to go to, and you're not ready. And I'm not saying that that's only a feminine thing. Guys do that too, right? And then this other person that started with your whole world and the thing that you're supposed to be serving, who you haven't served in forever, because you became consumed with the thing that you were consuming. It's vampire language, right? When that's removed from you, you languish. And it's you know, that fair warning, right? That coming of age is also a very difficult one.
You're muted.
I am muted. Geez, you'd think I know how to do this by now. I was going to say, we are officially past the 2-hour mark. I don't know how much steam you guys have left. But I know that we started late, so I'm trying to be gracious, but we've gotten about maybe halfway through the movie.
Right.
I suspect that this will probably need another installment, which I'm totally fine with. But I don't want to like, you know, cut into your guys' family time, because I know that it's very late and everything. So if you want to, we can start like wrapping up and go around and give kind of, let's say, concluding summary thoughts on some of the stuff that we've covered so far, and then maybe some potentials for looking forward and seeing what we can pull out of the second half of the movie. Because it's definitely not done yet. We've set up and we've looked at the problem firmly, but the resolution hasn't yet come. So Yeah. What do you got for us, Troy?
I think one of the biggest takeaways from this movie, and how we've been dealing with it, is the role of integration and how, right? Christ showed us how, right? It's death and resurrection. It's following Christ, dying daily, as Paul puts it, allowing for that integration of the earthly and the heavenly, and to come out something more after those little deaths. I really liked the discussion on the storing up the emotion or complex emotion that you're so uncomfortable with, you refuse to let it out. Man, that's super practical, and definitely something that's in the movie as well, that I think a lot of Christians have never seen a healthy community where they could learn to be in good integrated relationship with their whole self, let alone the selves around them. And I think that um I love fractal truth, like when you can, at different levels of analysis, the same pattern holds. This is one of those that I really think is helpful. That you can see on multiple layers of analysis, the integration of church community, the integration of self, with other close knit, um, a close knit unit, the integration within self and all of its individual components, and recognize that each of those, the whole is greater than the sum of each of its parts, and that we need to learn to properly integrate, properly go through the hero's journey of a death and resurrection. Um, and if we could do that on a more rapid and more willing scale, more often, be willing to go, oh, I see a death coming. I've been resurrected so many times. I trust God in this new death. All right, death is coming. I no longer need to be afraid of it. Well, let's have it now. Let's get the inoculation versus having the full-blown disease.
Hmm.
Yeah, if I had to give some of my concluding thoughts, well, since I do,
You do have to. Yep.
I do have to. Some of my concluding thoughts on the story and the conversation as we've been dealing with it here. I would also echo the integration and how important it is to understand our place, just macrocosm, microcosm, our place in the family, our place in the church, the place of emotions at the to give them a seat at the table. Even though, as I admitted, I don't do that, I need to, and I know I need to. Um, uh, and in the church, providing a space for that, because I personally have struggled with it because I don't know how, and I don't know what that would look like. And so it would be nice if as a church we could provide a safe place for people who are dealing with something like that, where they have exiled their emotions, provide a place where it's okay to show the excess of the emotion, where we can kind of relive a moment of what Riley went through in that puberty stage of everything is completely out of control, and that be okay. And we have people who can counsel and who can help to redirect to where the emotions can stabilize. And now all of a sudden we're a fully integrated person who's able to have empathy and experience these things and have emotions at the console at the appropriate time. Also, not ousting people who are not um, who don't fit in or who seem to cause a problem. As I said, with the red alarm buzzer that Joy just chucked and got rid of, it too often I think we see that happening where, oh, this person is a problem, or they're labeled as a problem person in the church, and it just is because they need more pastoral attention, and that doesn't benefit the production that goes on every Sunday. And so, unfortunately, we are not being a community, and we're not coming together to love one another as people. We might love one another as some sort of abstract concept of an imager of God, and whatever that means to us. But as far as practicality, if we're only seeing each other on Sunday, and we only care about each other as I see you, therefore upload all the programming that I have in my brain about who you are and what you're dealing with, but I don't really think about you any other time of the week, then I'm not loving you. And in fact, anything that I demonstrate to you on Sunday, it's just part of the show. It's not real. It's not authentic. And so integration and authenticity is really something that I take away from this conversation.
Fantastic. Amber?
I think it just takes me back to that Jesus summed up so beautifully what was the most important. Love God, love your neighbor. That without all of those things integrating together, we're not complete. And we need all of those pieces, the community and God, because separation from any one of those can bring spiritual, emotional, or physical death. And it is just so important that we create those spaces for all of us when we need them, because we all need them at times. And the times that we don't, we can be there to be help to the ones who do need it. So it is, Jesus was so, of course, so pointing that out so perfectly and so beautifully and so simply. It really just boils down to love God, love your neighbor. So that's what I got.
Right on. These were really great summary thoughts, by the way, guys. Normally when we do these, I usually go first, and so I'm kind of glad that I didn't. This has been a really fantastic exploration. Like I am genuinely convinced that there needs to be a part 2 of part 2. So part 2.1 or something. I don't even know what I'm going to call that. Inside Out 2 part 2 or something, whatever it is. I'll come up with a clever title. But man, as far as if I were to emphasize anything about what we've gone through so far, it would be about taking place and giving place. That relationship is not something that requires me to benefit from you, right? I should not put price tags on my love and my service. However, I should not be exhausting myself in a situation where relationship is evidently not what's happening, right? The way that joy did in the first movie and the way that anxiety does in this movie, which is that hostile takeover for one's own purposes. It's a very, very clear picture of what the manipulator does. Calling back to this book that Troy and I have been listening to reminds me of one thing that I'm detecting that he hasn't said explicitly in the book yet. I don't know if it's coming, but one thing that I'm detecting is that in the brain, in the function of the brain, the way the brain perceives things, there is very little difference between an external person who manipulates and uses me versus an internal dictator of the same kind that we call something like addiction. Addiction and a manipulator are the same person to a mind. To your brain, there's no distinguishing those two things. So it doesn't matter if the manipulation is coming from within or from without. It is still manipulation, right? And the cautionary tale is both not to be manipulated, but also not to be caught up in yourself enough to become that manipulator. Because the cautionary tale is not simply that anxiety is bad or that joy is bad for doing what they did. You come to find out in both movies that Joy was just trying to help Riley in the best way that she understood how. She was wrong. She did wrong. She was definitely incorrect. But from what she knew and understood, she was doing what she thought was right, which is why it was easy to justify for herself. Anxiety is doing the same thing. Anxiety at the end, when she finally has her meltdown, says, I was only trying to help Riley. I was only trying to protect her. I was trying to help. Right? So that fall apart moment was not due to a lack of good intentions. God save us from our good intentions. be aware that those are the things that can and do happen, right? And it's oftentimes our good intentions that guard us away from seeing what's actually occurring. We can't zoom out, right? That's something that, if I could emphasize anything, it's to just be aware of that danger in yourself. You might have really good intentions for what you're doing, but sometimes good intentions are a really well paved and beautified road to something really awful. So just being aware in that sense that your good intentions are not evidence of good integration. They're just good intentions, and they are certainly not infallible. Man, I can say it. I get to say I'm pleased. I'm pleased. Oh man,
Yes.
It's bittersweet. It's bittersweet to end a conversation, but this has been really, really fantastic. I don't want to lapse into repetition, so I'll leave it where it is. This has been so great. I thank you all so much, Troy and Sean and Amber and everybody that's watching, Sam and Cosmic Septic and Tavern Bible Podcast, and who else was here? We had some other faces. There's some names that I didn't recognize in here. Actually, there was Orthodox Boomer Grandma. That's a pretty cool name.
Jamie was here for a while.
Jamie was here. That's right. Jamie.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Nick showed up for a little bit.
Earth. That's right.
Yep.
There was some really good engagement in the chat. This was a really great conversation. I thank everybody for being here and for participating in it. Man, what a time. I am so excited to come back to this, but I'm really pleased with how this went. And if you're still listening, please like this video if you enjoy this. If you like the content that I'm making, you can check out more of my Cosmic Corner playlist on the Faith Unaltered homepage. Cosmic Corner is not the only show on Faith Unaltered by any stretch. So if you'd like to see more, go ahead and peruse the rest of our playlists and our live tab and our video and our shorts and everything else. We have miles of content at this point, and we're always looking to add more. If you like what you see here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and make sure that you're aware of the next time we go live, because we do this every Friday at 7, but we also have other shows that happen throughout the week and sometimes special streams and other things that we release. If you wanted to, if you would like to become a member of Faith Unaltered and support our ministry, if you can't do this in any other way, please pray for us. But if you'd like to join, click the join button and you get some exclusive content, private talks with us as hosts, get to see some behind the scenes stuff on how we do what we do, maybe get some one-on-ones for apologetics and things like that. You can join streams. And if you're on our clergy level of joined members, you also get to dictatorially tell us what shows you would like us to see, and we will do them. And there's that, huh? How's that for an incentive? So if you'd like to tell us what to do, go ahead and give us your money. If you'd like to support our ministry, please, if you don't feel obligated, if you would want to and you are capable and God is leading you to do so because we've been a blessing to you, you can be a blessing to us. That's fine. We can do that through Venmo or PayPal. We have links in our description or in the homepage of Faith Unaltered. Becoming a member is one of the good ways you can do that. But the very best way that you can support us is please pray for us. Please lift us up in prayer, both the ministry and us individually. It is hard to be on God's radar without popping up on Satan's radar. And boy, is he hammering home on some of us. So just please keep us in prayer if you would, if you could. That being said, boy, has this been a good time. Thank you for watching Cosmic Corner. Holy smokes. Yeah, I feel good. Having a good time. Good night. God bless. Stay like Christ.